They didn't load the prisoners onto a bus for court. They loaded them for a beauty appointment. The line of Japanese women stood in the cold daylight like a single held breath, coats too thin, hair pinned back in practical knots, faces trained into stillness that didn't ask for mercy and didn't offer a story. Aiko Tanaka kept her eyes down, not from shame, but from calculation. In her head, she rehearsed what came next because rehearsal was safer than hope. Names would be called. Papers would be signed. Questions would be asked in a language she only half understood. She had learned that the worst part of captivity wasn't hunger or fatigue. It was the way time became a hallway with no doors. Around her, boots moved over gravel with a steady crunch, the kind of sound that made every spine straighten without anyone meaning to. A young private carried a clipboard as if it weighed more than his rifle ever had. Nearby, a medic's bag swung softly at his side, and the small detail felt almost insulting in its normalcy. Normal things did not belong here. At the front of the line, Captain William, while Harper stood with his shoulders squared and his face unreadable, the kind of face that looked carved by responsibility rather than emotion. He didn't glare at them. He didn't smirk. He simply watched the line the way a man watches a bridge he doesn't fully trust, waiting to see if it holds. He had been warned about revenge disguised as justice, about a crowd's hunger for spectacle, about how quickly a uniform could become an excuse. His orders were clear: transfer, processing, relocation. His conscience was less tidy. He scanned the women and saw what his men refused to see. People who had been reduced to categories. POW, enemy, problem. And because his men were tired, and because the war had left bruises on everyone's pride, he knew how easily problem could turn into punishment if he didn't keep the temperature of the room low. Sergeant Thomas Reed hovered like a shadow at Harper's shoulder, jaw tight, eyes darting between the line and the soldiers behind it. Reed had the posture of a man who believed discipline was the only thing standing between order and chaos. He didn't hate them, not exactly. He just wanted the world to make sense again, and in his mind sense required consequences. Aiko heard her name, Tanaka. Aiko, spoken carefully, as if the syllables were fragile. She lifted her gaze 1 inch, enough to meet the clipboard, not the man holding it. A soldier stepped forward to guide her, not grabbing, just pointing with an open hand. Open hands were rare here. That alone made her pulse stumble. The line moved in small increments, each woman stepping into the unknown with the same measured pace, as if speed might invite a trap. Beyond the fence, an olive-drab bus idled with a low cough. Its windows were fogged at the edges, and the exhaust hung in the air like a gray ribbon. Aiko expected metal doors, barking voices, maybe a courthouse, maybe a warehouse where questions echoed off concrete. She expected the language of control, commands, threats, warnings. Instead, Harper's voice came, quiet and controlled, aimed at his men more than at the prisoners. No commentary. No souvenirs. No games. Reed blinked at him. Sir. Harper didn't explain. He just looked at the bus, then back at the line, as if measuring the weight of something invisible. Aiko stepped onto the first bus stair. The rubber tread was worn smooth by ordinary shoes. For a moment, that mundane detail struck her harder than any threat could have. Ordinary shoes, ordinary steps, an ordinary vehicle, carrying people the world had declared extraordinary in the worst way. She sat by the window, hands folded, spine straight, and watched the camp shrink behind glass. Outside, the road bent toward town, toward storefronts, toward civilians, toward a life she was no longer sure she was allowed to touch. And somewhere ahead, though she couldn't see it yet, a small sign would wait with words she never expected to be connected to her name: Beauty Salon. Captain William Will Harper sat near the front of the bus where he could see everything without staring at anyone, his cap brim casting a narrow shadow over eyes that had learned to measure a room in seconds. The engine's steady rumble made the metal floor vibrate, a quiet reminder that the world could keep moving even when people inside it felt stuck. He held a folder on his lap with crisp papers, typed lines, and signatures that pretended to be clean. Paper never showed the parts that mattered, like the way a man's voice could tip a situation from calm into cruelty, or the way a crowd could turn mean simply because it was bored. Harper had watched that happen too many times since the surrender, not in firefights, but in hallways, checkpoints, and waiting rooms where nothing was supposed to go wrong. He kept his instructions simple because complicated orders gave tired men room to improvise, and improvisation was where bad history got made. Sergeant Thomas Reed sat one row back, angled toward the aisle, as if he could block trouble with his shoulders. Reed's hands were clasped so tight his knuckles looked pale, and every few seconds his gaze cut to the women, then to the soldiers, then to the road ahead. Harper could read the way he read weather. Reed wanted justice, but what he really wanted was certainty. He wanted the world to behave according to a rulebook, and war had torn the rulebook in half. Harper understood the feeling. He just refused to let it drive the bus. Outside the window, the camp's fence slid away into open fields and scattered houses, a landscape that looked almost innocent from a distance. A water tower rose above a cluster of rooftops like a landmark for ordinary life, and the sight tightened something in Harper's chest because it reminded him what he was trying to protect. Not property, not pride, but the idea that Americans did not have to become the thing they claimed to oppose. He glanced back, careful, not lingering, and saw Aiko Tanaka sitting straight by the window, hands folded as if she had been taught that composure was the last possession no one could confiscate. She did not look at him. She did not look at the guards either. She watched the passing road with the focus of someone counting exits. Harper respected that. Fear was loud in some people, but in others it became precision. A young private shifted his rifle strap and muttered something under his breath. Harper did not catch the words, only the tone, and that was enough. Harper leaned slightly toward the aisle and spoke without raising his voice. Keep it professional. If you cannot, you can sit in the back and say nothing. The private straightened, embarrassment flashing across his face before he swallowed it. Reed frowned. Sir, if the townspeople see this, they are going to talk. Harper kept his eyes on the road. They already talk, he said. They talk when they think they are right. They talk when they think they are hurt. Today they can talk about something that does not stain us. Reed's jaw worked as if chewing a protest. With respect, sir, they were the enemy. Harper nodded once, as if acknowledging a fact that did not settle the argument. They were, he said, and now they are in our care. That is the whole point. Aiko heard none of it clearly, only fragments carried by vibration and breath, but she felt the temperature of the bus change in the way people's shoulders eased by half an inch. She did not relax. She had learned that kindness could be a hallway too, one that led somewhere unexpected. The bus rolled into town at a steady 20 miles per hour, tires humming over pavement, passing a hardware store, a diner, a church with white paint, and a narrow steeple. Curtains twitched in windows. A dog barked once, and then went quiet. Harper watched the sidewalks the way a lifeguard watched water, scanning for the moment somebody decided to make a scene. He had chosen the destination for a reason that would sound strange to men like Reed, but made perfect sense to him. If he could return one small piece of order to these women without giving anyone a stage for humiliation, he could keep this town from becoming an ugly story whispered for decades. He adjusted the folder on his lap and exhaled slowly. Not a prayer, not an apology, just a decision held firm. The bus signaled, turned right, and slowed beside a modest storefront with wide front glass. Harper stood, feeling every eye without meeting it. We are here, he said, and for the first time since leaving the camp, the words did not sound like a threat. The bus door side opened, and town air slipped in smelling like soap, car exhaust, and something faintly sweet from a bakery down the block. Aiko Tanaka did not move until the soldier nearest the steps shifted his weight, not pushing, just making space with the kind of patience that felt unfamiliar. She rose with the others, feet careful on the rubber tread, palms empty where a person might have held a bag in a normal life. Outside, the sidewalk was clean, chalky in the winter light, and the storefront glass reflected them back. As a strange procession, uniformed Americans, then women in worn coats, each face set like it had been practiced in private. Captain William Will Harper stepped down first and paused at the curb, scanning the street. Two boys on bicycles slowed, stared, then pedaled on without a word, as if even their curiosity knew to keep distance. A woman in a wool hat stopped mid-step with a grocery basket on her arm, eyes widening, then dropping quickly to the ground as though looking too long might be impolite or dangerous. Harper did not correct her. He simply lifted his hand in a small, calm signal to his men. Close formation, quiet. Sergeant Thomas Reed stayed half a step behind Harper, his gaze sharp, his shoulders squared, as if he expected a thrown insult to have weight. The storefront ahead had wide windows and pale curtains, and a modest sign above the door with neat lettering that did not belong in the same universe as barbed wire and ration lines. Aiko read the letters slowly, sounding them in her mind like a lesson. Collins Beauty Salon. The word beauty landed oddly, not as a promise, but as a question. She had seen beauty used as a weapon in propaganda posters and as a consolation in ruined cities, and she did not know which kind lived here. The bell above the salon door chimed when Harper opened it, a bright little sound that made several soldiers flinch as if it were too cheerful to be trusted. Warmth spilled out, and with it the smell of hot water, shampoo, and clean towels. Inside, the light was soft, not the hard glare of an office or the dimness of a barracks. A row of chairs sat along the wall, and on the far side were mirrors that turned every movement into doubled reality. Aiko's breath tightened when she saw the scissors and combs laid out like tools. She told herself not to react. A reaction was a gift to whoever wanted one. A woman stepped forward from behind a counter, wiping her hands on a towel. She was in her 40s, hair pinned in a tidy roll, sleeves rolled up as if she had been in the middle of work. Her eyes went first to Harper's insignia, then to the line of women behind him, then back to Harper. She did not gasp. She did not ask what they had done. She simply looked as though she had been handed a hard day and decided she would not drop it. "Captain," she said, voice steady. "You said you would bring them in quietly." Harper nodded. "Maggie Collins," he replied, like a man reciting a name that mattered. "Thank you for opening early." Maggie's gaze moved again, softer now, resting on the women's faces with the careful respect of someone who understands that staring can bruise. Aiko felt that difference immediately. In the camp, eyes were either suspicious or indifferent. Here, Maggie's eyes were neither. They were practical, human. Reed cleared his throat, uncomfortable in a room that smelled like ordinary life. "Ma'am, you do not have to do this," he said, as if duty should always be heavy. Maggie looked at him for a moment, then at the women. "I know I do not have to," she said. "That is why it matters." Harper stood aside to let the line enter, keeping his body angled to block the door from the street's view. Aiko stepped over the threshold and felt heat reach her skin. For a second, she almost believed she had walked into a different country. She caught her reflection in the nearest mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because of age or injury, but because the face in the glass still had something that refused to collapse. She lifted her chin one fraction, not in defiance, but in preservation, and the bell above the door chimed again as the last woman entered, and the outside world was gently shut away. Maggie Collins moved with the quiet authority of a woman who had spent years making nervous people feel safe, without promising them anything she could not deliver. She guided the women deeper into the salon, away from the front windows, and with each step the air grew warmer and softer, heavy with steam and the clean bite of soap. Aiko Tanaka noticed details the way she had learned to notice everything. The folded towels stacked like white bricks on a shelf, the glass jars of hairpins lined up with precise spacing, the faint ticking of a wall clock that sounded steadier than her own pulse. Maggie pointed to the chairs along the wall and spoke slowly, choosing simple words, as if language itself could be a bridge built plank by plank. "You can sit. You can rest," she said. Her tone carried no pity, only permission. Aiko sat on the edge of a chair, back straight, hands folded in her lap. She watched Maggie fill a basin with warm water. The sound was ordinary, almost soothing, yet it made Aiko's throat tighten because ordinary sounds had been missing for so long. Captain William Will Harper remained near the doorway, not hovering, just present, a human boundary between this room and whatever the street might decide to become. Sergeant Thomas Reed stood beside him, stiff in a place where the air smelled like lavender instead of gasoline. Reed's eyes kept drifting to the mirrors, then to the women, then to the scissors laid out on a tray. He looked like a man waiting for the moment the room would reveal its true purpose. Maggie caught his glance and did not bristle. She simply slid the scissors a little farther back on the counter, not hiding them, just removing their sharpness from the center of the story. Then she lifted a stack of towels and carried them to Aiko, placing one gently on the counter in front of her, like a gift that did not require gratitude. Warm, Maggie said, and pressed the towel into Aiko's hands. Aiko hesitated, fingers hovering for half a second as if the cloth might disappear. Then she took it. The heat seeped into her palms and traveled up her wrists, and the sensation was so simple that it felt almost dangerous. Maggie glanced at Harper. "How many today?" she asked. Harper answered softly, respectful of the room. 12, he said. Maggie nodded once, already adjusting the day in her mind, already making a plan that did not involve questions she did not need. She turned to a younger stylist who had been watching from behind a curtain, eyes wide, cheeks pale. "Betty, start the kettles. We will need more hot water," Maggie said. Betty swallowed and obeyed, moving quickly, relieved to have a task. Harper watched that, too. A task could turn fear into steadiness. Reed shifted his weight. "Ma'am," he began, then stopped, as if he could not find the right sentence for what he felt. Maggie looked at him calmly. "If you are worried about safety, Sergeant, I keep my front door locked when I need to," she said. Reed's brows pulled together. "That is not what I mean." Maggie's mouth softened, not into a smile, but into understanding. "Then say what you mean," she replied. Reed's voice lowered, almost reluctant. "People out there think kindness makes you weak," he said. Maggie glanced toward the window where the curtains filtered the street into pale shapes. "People think many things," she answered. "I am not in the business of living by their worst thoughts." Aiko listened without understanding every word, but she understood the rhythm. Tension, then a firm calm pressing back. She looked down at her hands on the warm towel and noticed something she had not expected to notice in herself. She was not shrinking. She was not pleading. She was simply existing, right here, in a chair that did not belong to a prison, under light that did not judge. Maggie approached again, holding a small pitcher of water and a paper cup. She set the cup near Aiko's elbow with the same careful distance one offers to a stranger on a train. "Drink if you want," she said. Aiko's fingers closed around the cup. The water tasted plain, clean, and it made her eyes sting for reasons she refused to show. Across the room, Harper caught that brief flicker and looked away, as if giving her privacy was part of his duty. Reed watched Harper look away, and something in Reed's face tightened, then loosened, as if the rules in his head had shifted by a fraction. Maggie tied an apron around her waist, squared her shoulders, and began to work as though the most important act of the day was not punishment or forgiveness, but the steady return of order to a life that had been left in pieces. The first chair was filled before anyone spoke about why the chairs mattered. Maggie Collins guided one woman forward with a gentle motion of her hand, the way a librarian guides someone to a quiet table, and the woman sat as if the seat might vanish. Maggie draped a clean cape around her shoulders, careful not to tug, careful not to turn the gesture into control. Aiko Tanaka watched from her place along the wall, eyes steady, reading the room like a map. She saw Betty at the back, hands moving fast at the kettles, and she saw the way Betty kept glancing toward the window, as if expecting a stone to come through it. She heard the bell outside once, faint, followed by muffled voices that did not belong to the salon. The sound was not loud, but it carried the sharp edge of judgment. Harper's head turned slightly, and Reed's body tightened, as if he had been waiting for that exact moment. The front curtains shifted with a draft, and for a second Aiko saw silhouettes on the sidewalk. A man with a hat, a woman holding a purse close, two teenagers pretending they were not watching. Maggie did not rush to the window. She did not pull the curtain wide and challenge them. She simply moved one step closer to the door and slid the bolt into place with a small click that sounded final, without sounding afraid. Reed noticed. "Ma'am, they are gathering," he said, voice low. Maggie nodded without looking up from her work. "They gather for parades, too," she replied. "It does not mean they get a say in what happens inside my shop." Harper's gaze met hers for a brief second, a silent exchange of responsibility. Reed took a step toward the window, then stopped when Harper raised a hand, palm down. "Hold," Harper murmured, and Reed held, but his eyes burned with irritation, like a man being asked to swallow something bitter. From the street came a sharper sentence, the kind that did not need to be understood word for word to be recognized as contempt. Betty's shoulders jumped. One of the women in the waiting chairs flinched, hands gripping the armrests. Aiko did not flinch. She felt the sting anyway, but she kept her face smooth, because giving the street a reaction would be like feeding it. Maggie lifted her chin and spoke to the room, not as an announcement, but as an anchor. "We are going to take this one at a time," she said. "Nobody has to rush. Nobody has to be afraid of the mirror." The word mirror landed on Aiko's thoughts like a weight. Mirrors were honest in ways people were not. In the camp, there were no mirrors, only water surfaces that lied when the light was wrong. Here, the mirrors were bright, clean, unavoidable. Maggie began combing the seated woman's hair with slow strokes, the comb teeth whispering through tangles as if undoing them was an act of patience, not power. The woman's breathing steadied. By degrees. Then Maggie offered a small nod toward Aiko, a question without words. "Are you next, when you are ready?" Aiko's throat tightened, not with fear of pain, but with the dread of being seen clearly. She stood anyway. She walked to the chair with measured steps, stopping when Maggie gestured toward the seat. Reed watched her as she sat, eyes narrowed, as if he expected gratitude or anger or any emotion that would fit his idea of what an enemy should look like. Aiko gave him none. She placed her hands in her lap and faced the mirror. The glass returned her gaze without cruelty. It showed a woman who had been surviving for a long time and was tired of being treated like a lesson. Maggie set the cape around Aiko's shoulders and said softly, "Comfortable?" Aiko understood the tone more than the word. She gave a small nod. From the street, a voice rose again, and this time Harper moved, positioning himself so his uniform was visible through the frosted edge of the window, a quiet warning without threats. Reed leaned closer to Harper, tension spilling out in a whisper. "Sir, this is going to look like we are rewarding them." Harper did not take his eyes off the front. "No," he said. "It is going to look like we are refusing to become smaller." Maggie lifted a warm towel from a stack and pressed it gently against Aiko's neck, the heat blooming like a secret. Aiko closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them again, refusing to let anyone mistake relief for surrender. Outside, the town could keep its opinions. Inside, a different standard was being set, one quiet motion at a time. Aiko Tanaka felt the warm towel settle at the base of her neck like a small, deliberate promise that nothing in this room needed to be earned through humiliation. Maggie Collins let the heat do its work before she did hers, waiting until Aiko's shoulders lowered by the slightest fraction, waiting until the air around them stopped bracing for impact. The salon held a careful hush, broken only by the low hiss of kettles in the back and the soft whisper of comb teeth moving through hair. Betty moved between basins with a new steadiness, as if the routine itself was teaching her courage. Maggie loosened the towel and replaced it with another, freshly warmed, then reached for a wide-tooth comb and began at the ends, patient, respectful, never yanking. Aiko watched herself in the mirror, not with vanity, but with the guarded focus of someone verifying the rules. The chair did not turn into an interrogation seat. The cape did not become a restraint. The hands at her shoulders did not demand. Her reflection looked older than she remembered, not in years, but in the way the eyes carried too many unsaid sentences. Maggie's voice came softly, more for the calm of the room than for the content of the words. "This might feel strange," she said, speaking slowly and clearly. "But it is just hair, just water, just time." Aiko did not answer. She did not trust her English to carry what she meant, and she did not trust her voice to stay steady if she tried. Instead, she gave a small nod that said, "I understand enough." Captain William Will Harper stayed near the entrance, his posture loose but alert, listening to the street without letting the street enter. The muffled crowd noise had not disappeared. It had simply learned the door was locked. A car rolled past outside at a cautious 10 miles per hour, tires whispering on pavement, and someone's laughter flickered, then died quickly, as if the town could not decide what emotion was appropriate. Sergeant Thomas Reed shifted and crossed his arms, watching Maggie's hands with a suspicion that was slowly being forced to find a new target. He had expected fear, resistance, gratitude, something dramatic. Instead, he was watching a woman brush another woman's hair, as if that alone was a form of order worth defending. Maggie reached for a bottle and poured a small amount of shampoo into her palm, the scent clean and mild, not perfumed enough to feel like a show. She guided Aiko to the basin, supporting her movement with a light touch at the elbow, careful to ask with her eyes before she asked with her hands. Aiko lowered herself back, neck resting on the curved porcelain edge. The warmth of the water spread through her scalp, and she inhaled sharply before she could stop herself. Maggie paused immediately, hands still, voice even. "Too hot?" she asked. Aiko blinked, then shook her head once. The water was not too hot. The feeling was simply too unfamiliar. Maggie resumed, massaging shampoo through hair with a gentle firmness that felt professional, not intimate, never crossing a line, never turning care into possession. Suds slid into the basin and disappeared, cleanly, as if the day's heaviness could be rinsed away in small, unglamorous fractions. In the mirror beyond the basin, Aiko could see Reed's face. His eyes were fixed on her, then on Maggie, then on Harper, as if trying to locate the trick. Harper met Reed's glance without challenge. The message was simple: do not ruin this. Reed swallowed, his throat moving like a man forcing down words. Maggie rinsed carefully, using a pitcher to control the flow so it did not splash Aiko's face, and the precision of that small mercy hit Aiko harder than the warmth. In the camp, water had been a ration, a rule, a bargaining chip. Here, it was simply given in the right amount. Aiko sat up, towels offered immediately, and for a moment she held one to her head and let herself breathe as if breathing were allowed. Maggie guided her back to the chair and began to dry and brush, section by section, working with the quiet confidence of someone restoring a simple dignity without announcing it. Outside, the town's judgment hovered like weather. Inside, the room kept its own climate. Harper watched the women's faces soften by degrees, watched shoulders unclench, watched Reed's anger lose its fuel. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply stood guard over a standard he refused to let slip, while a woman with rolled-up sleeves and steady hands proved that decency could be practiced like a craft. The salon had found a rhythm, the kind that did not ask permission from the outside world. Hair was washed, towels were folded, cups were refilled, and for a brief stretch of time the room behaved like any other small business in a small American town. Then the rhythm caught on a single tremor. One of the younger prisoners, a woman with narrow shoulders and hands that shook even when she tried to hide it, sat in the next chair after Aiko. Her name tag, written in careful block letters, read Keiko Sato. Maggie Collins draped the cape around her with the same steady care, but when Maggie reached for the comb, Keiko's breath hitched and her eyes flicked to the tray of tools. The fear was not loud. It was sharp and silent, like a snapped string. Keiko's fingers curled against the chair arms. Her shoulders rose. Aiko saw it in the mirror and understood immediately. Keiko did not see a salon. Keiko saw a room where control could be taken away. Maggie noticed too, and in the smallest possible way, she changed her approach. She set the comb down and took a step back so the space between them widened. Her palms were open, empty. "No rush," Maggie said, voice low, plain. "You tell me." Keiko's lips parted, but no English came out. Her eyes went to the mirror, then away from it, as if the glass might reveal something she could not bear to see. Outside, the muffled voices on the sidewalk rose and fell again, a reminder that judgment was waiting like a storm that never quite arrived but never left either. Sergeant Thomas Reed took a half step forward, impatience tightening him. "Ma'am, we do not have all day," he murmured, trying to keep authority in his voice and keep irritation out of it. Maggie did not look at him. She kept her attention on Keiko, as if that were the only respectful choice. "We have time for what matters," she answered. The sentence was not dramatic. It was final. Reed's mouth opened to reply, but Captain William Will Harper lifted a hand. Not a command, not a threat, just a quiet stop. Reed halted, frustration flickering across his face like heat. Harper did not scold him. He simply watched the moment the way he watched a fuse, knowing that a single careless spark could ruin everything. Maggie reached to the counter and picked up a small hand mirror, the kind used to show the back of a haircut. She held it out to Keiko without stepping closer. "This is for you," she said. "You can look. You can decide." Keiko stared at the mirror as if it were a test. Then, slowly, she extended both hands and took it. Her grip was tight, knuckles pale. She looked into the mirror, not at her hair, but at her own eyes. Her gaze wavered, then steadied, as if she had found proof that she was still here. Aiko felt something shift in her chest, a recognition deeper than language. The mirror was not a luxury. It was a return of ownership. Maggie waited. She did not fill the silence with reassurance. She respected it. After a few seconds, Keiko lowered the mirror and gave the smallest nod. Maggie nodded back, equal and calm, and then, instead of reaching for scissors, she reached for the warm towel first. She placed it over Keiko's shoulders like a shield made of comfort. Keiko's breathing slowed, the tremor in her hands easing by degrees. Reed watched the exchange, and the look on his face changed, not because he suddenly felt tender, but because he realized something he had not wanted to admit. Control could be exercised without cruelty, and the absence of cruelty was not weakness. Harper saw Reed realize it, and Harper's eyes softened for a brief second before returning to the window. He could hear the street. He could imagine the rumors that would spread by sundown. But inside this room, the only story being written was the one that mattered. Maggie picked up the comb and began, slow and patient, and Keiko did not flinch this time. Aiko sat with damp hair combed smooth, watching in the mirror as another woman reclaimed the simple right to be handled gently. The air felt lighter, not because the past had changed, but because the present had drawn a line. Harper looked at the women, then at his soldiers, and he understood the reversal clearly. Punishment would have been easy, and everyone would have called it justified. This was harder. This required discipline. This required standards. And for the first time that day, Reed's shoulders lowered, as if he had finally seen what his captain had been guarding all along. By late morning the salon smelled like clean hair and warm linen, and the mirrors no longer felt like judges. Aiko Tanaka sat with her hair dried and brushed into a simple shape that did not try to impress anyone, only to restore order. The cape had been removed, folded, set aside as if it had never been anything more than cloth. Maggie Collins moved from chair to chair, checking in with a glance, adjusting a part here, smoothing a stray strand there, her hands sure, her presence steady. Betty's cheeks had color now, the kind that came from purpose instead of panic, and she carried a fresh stack of towels as if she had been doing it her whole life. The muffled voices outside had thinned, not because the town suddenly approved, but because there was nothing to feed on. No spectacle, no shouting, only a locked door and a quiet business refusing to perform. Captain William Will Harper stood near the front with his folder tucked under one arm, watching the street through a narrow gap in the curtain. Every few minutes he shifted his weight, not restless, just alert, counting footsteps, listening for a change in tone. Sergeant Thomas Reed hovered behind him, no longer bristling, but still wound tight, as if his pride needed one last argument to feel satisfied. When Harper finally stepped away from the window, Reed followed him toward the small counter where a coffee pot sat on a warming plate, its glass stained from 100 mornings. Maggie poured 2 cups without asking, the way one does for men who have been standing too long. Harper took his with a nod. Reed hesitated, then accepted his, fingers brushing the warm ceramic as if the heat might explain something. Harper did not drink right away. He stared into the coffee, dark and simple, and the silence between the 3 adults was thick with what none of them could say in front of the women. Reed broke first, voice low enough that it would not carry. "Sir, I still do not understand," he said. "They are prisoners. Why bring them here?" Maggie's eyes did not harden. Harper's did not soften into sentiment. He answered like a man giving a report, not a speech. "Because the town is watching," Harper said. "Because my soldiers are watching. Because if I let this turn into humiliation, I will spend the rest of my life pretending it was necessary." Reed frowned, as if the word humiliation tasted wrong. "They would have survived it," he said, and the fact that he chose that phrase revealed more than he meant to. Harper finally lifted his cup and took a small sip, letting the heat settle before he replied. "Survival is not the standard," he said. "Not for us." Maggie set her own cup down and wiped the counter with a cloth, a repetitive motion that made her words sound even more certain. "People keep saying someone has to pay," she murmured. "But payment is not the same as punishment, and punishment is not the same as justice." Reed looked at her, frustrated and almost pleading, as if he wanted permission to keep his anger. "What do you call this then?" he asked. Maggie glanced toward the chairs where Aiko and the others waited, quieter now, more present in their bodies. "I call it a reset," she said. "A way to keep today from turning into something we regret tomorrow." Harper nodded once, the movement small but decisive. Reed's gaze drifted to Aiko, who sat with her hands folded, listening without seeming to listen, posture straight, eyes calm. Aiko did not look back at Reed. She was looking at the mirror, not admiring herself, but confirming that her face still belonged to her. Reed's voice dropped further, almost to himself. They do not look like what I expected, he admitted. Harper's expression did not change, but something in his tone did, as if he had been waiting for Reed to say that truth out loud. That is the point, Harper replied. War teaches you to see symbols. I need my men to see people again. Outside, a car horn sounded and faded, ordinary and indifferent. Inside, Maggie lifted a small envelope and slid it across the counter toward Harper, not as a bill that demanded, but as a record that mattered. Harper did not open it yet. He simply covered it with his palm, as if protecting something fragile. Then he looked back toward the women and spoke with careful clarity, the kind meant to be understood through tone, even if the words did not land. After this, you return with us, he said. Quietly. Safely. Aiko gave a small nod, not gratitude, not submission, but acknowledgement. In that moment Harper understood something else, something that felt heavier than orders. This was not about making prisoners comfortable. It was about making Americans accountable. When the last towel had been folded and the last chair had been wiped down, Maggie Collins opened the front door with a slow, deliberate motion, not as surrender, but as a reminder that her shop was still part of the town. The bell chimed once, bright and ordinary, and the sound seemed to drain some of the tension from the air. The sidewalk outside held a few stragglers who had run out of outrage, and now wore only curiosity. A man in a work jacket stared for a beat too long, then looked away as if embarrassed by his own gaze. Hey! Teenage girl clutched a schoolbook and whispered to her friend, but the whisper did not carry far enough to become a weapon. Captain William Harper stepped out first, posture straight, expression calm, the kind of calm that made people reconsider their next sentence. Sergeant Thomas Reed followed, scanning left and right, no longer looking for an excuse to react, but looking for a way to prevent anyone else from reacting. Harper lifted a hand, palm down, and his men moved into position with quiet precision, forming a corridor not of force, but of protection, leaving enough space for dignity to walk through without brushing against anyone's anger. Inside, Aiko Tanaka rose with the others, hair neatly brushed, face clean, shoulders set in a way that said she remembered who she was even if the world insisted on calling her something else. Maggie handed each woman a small folded cloth and a simple ribbon, nothing extravagant, nothing that would turn the moment into a performance. Aiko accepted hers with both hands, not bowing, not shrinking, just receiving. Maggie's eyes met hers for a brief second, and in that second there was no victor, no captive, only two women who understood that the smallest courtesies were sometimes the strongest defiance. Aiko stepped out into the daylight and felt the air bite at her damp hair, felt the sun on her cheek, and kept walking. She did not look at the onlookers. She did not give them her attention as payment. She kept her gaze forward, following Harper's measured pace toward the bus. One woman on the sidewalk muttered something that might have been disapproval. Before Reed could move, Harper tilted his head slightly, and the mutter died in the speaker's throat as if the uniform itself had reminded him of consequences. Aiko heard the sound, but she did not flinch. She had learned not to feed stray cruelty. The bus door opened, and the women climbed in, one by one, stepping into the familiar metal and worn rubber tread. Yet the feeling was not the same as before. The bus no longer carried only fear. It carried a different kind of weight, the quiet knowledge that someone had chosen restraint when no one would have blamed him for choosing harshness. Harper climbed aboard last and turned briefly, looking back at the storefront. Maggie stood in the doorway with her hands clasped, hair pinned, sleeves rolled up, the picture of a woman who would wash dishes later and sweep hair from the floor and never call herself brave. Betty stood behind her, eyes wide, shoulders lifted, like she had just seen the world shift by an inch and was afraid to breathe too hard in case it shifted back. Harper nodded once to Maggie, not gratitude that demanded repayment, but respect that acknowledged her standard. Maggie nodded back, as if to say, do not let it slip when you leave this room. The bus pulled away at a steady 15 miles per hour, rolling past the diner, the hardware store, the church with its white steeple. Curtains moved again in windows, but the movement felt different now, less hungry. Reed sat one row behind Harper, staring at his hands as if searching for the old certainty and not finding it in the same place. Finally he spoke, voice low, almost reluctant. "Sir," he said, "they will still hate us for this." Harper kept his eyes on the road ahead. "Some will," he replied. "But history does not belong to the loudest people on the sidewalk." Aiko watched the town recede through the glass until it became fields again, then fence lines, then the distant outline of the camp. She tightened the small ribbon in her palm, not because she planned to decorate herself, but because the ribbon was proof that for one morning, she had been treated like a person. She did not raise her voice. She raised the standard, and 3 grown Americans had felt it in the silence. "Eli,